Hello, it's Andrew Eborn here with Lives on Lockdown. I'm delighted to welcome back Paul Roffman. How are you doing, Paul?
Very good. Another cup of tea in hand and ready
Another
to go
cup
again.
of tea. I bet you missed that. Do they make good tea in the States?
Well, fortunately, I'm a herbal tea drinker and a coffee man, really. So I get my illy cup coffee every morning. I've got my little tub and my Bialetti on the stove top. I'm very happy.
I'll tell you, because America, everywhere's coffees, and you go to these diners, but most of it is like the weakest thing you could ever have. It's like dirty dishwater, some of it, isn't it?
Well, they've got good coffee shops here. So there's
They
the
have
place I go.
phenomenal coffee shops, but some of those diners, some of the coffee,
Oh, yeah.
I like mine super strength. You've got to have like that. It's got to stand the spoon up in it, really.
Yeah, no, there's a place in Melrose called Toasted and Roasted, which is just next to the Groundlings Theatre. And they're a lovely couple who own it, Mike and Ali. And
Mike and Ali,
Mike and
salmonella.
Ali.
We love it. It just rolls off the tongue.
Or Ali and Mike.
You'll never have to buy a cup of coffee again now you've given them a shout out. I love it. It's got to be good. Last time we spoke about differences, about English humour, as we call it over here, about the extraordinary things that we were subjected to in the 70s, about the whole issue of race and so on and so forth. It's been dragged screaming back into the spotlight, sadly, yet again, because of the terrible situation going on. Talk to us on the ground, because the media stories, the way that media around the world manipulates things or gives a tainted view, if you like. I mean, I always say the way we get our news is, I say this to the children, we look at all the different channels. We look at the BBC, we look at CNN, we look at Fox, we then go to RT, we look at Al Jazeera, and somewhere between all of those will be the truth.
Yeah.
Because it's all about that sort of side. On the ground, we're seeing now, apart from the corona stories, which we'll come on to, it's all about the riots and the terrible situation. Tell me from the ground perspective, what's happening? What's the story?
It's not good. It's really bad. Like I said, this is a very middle class would be, realistically area. And the protests started. Funny enough, it must have been Saturday. Yeah, Saturday. So I got a call on Saturday from a friend of my mum's, and she said, "Oh, do you know there's a protest on Fairfax?" Now, Fairfax is a road which is just near me, off Sunset Boulevard. I'm between Sunset and Fountain, and it's kind of a grid system here. So it's kind of it's quite easy to get around and know your way around. Anyway, so I was like, "Oh, that's just down the road." And as is my wont, I appreciate everyone saying stay safe, but I do tend to go and look and see what's going on around me. And I think it's important, and it's just the way I am as a human being, and I have to do it. And, I'm going to live my life irrespective of the situation in front of me. And the more I've gone through this situation, I feel I'm getting back to being myself in that respect. And, like you said, you have to look at the evidence, and then you have to make a decision based on the evidence in front of you or the various thoughts. Anyway, so I've got one of these scooters, these Segway scooters, which fortunately I bought last year, which is fantastic. So I whiz around on that all around town. I don't have a car here. I was using Ubers all the time. And if I needed a car, renting one, because the cost of cars are so expensive. So I went out to Fairfax, and there's some videos of this, which I have on my Instagram, on Paul Roffman Magic. And hopefully I'm going to try and edit them together for a YouTube thing and maybe put some voiceover or something, another project. So I joined this throng on Santa Monica Boulevard. These boulevards are endless streets that run the whole gamut of LA all the way down to the beach. And so I'm on Santa Monica Boulevard, and it's a very cordial, very respectful overall protest. And there's cars, people on their cars, there's people with banners, they're shouting, "I can't breathe," they're shouting whatever, Black Lives Matter. And so I'm following it, and I've got my new camera here. So I've got there it is. M50, which I'm using for video in general as well, which was great. So I was getting to grips with that, taking photos and video. And I would whiz along the route. I would get in front of it, and then I'd take some photos, and then follow it a bit and get in front of it. Anyway, it was fine. And I'd heard it was on Fairfax, and there was problems, but I didn't see any. Then we reached the sheriff's department, and there's a line of sheriffs with guns standing at the entrance to the department, and then there's a gate in front of them. And suddenly we get there, and the drums are beating, and it's like the procession suddenly turns onto that and starts facing them off, and the rail starts closing in front of them. But I can see the side rail, and you can see through it, and you're pretty close. And then up on the roof is another police sheriff, because the sheriffs are different from the police. And he's watching, and I think he's videoing, and he's armed up as well. And it's starting to feel a bit sinister at this point. And the drums are like, and people are shouting. And then a couple of people pick up a few twigs, I would say, and throw them over the wall. Now, at that point, I'm thinking, if that's a dustbin lid or something bigger, this could really go off now. And suddenly, it dissipated. It was like they said what they had to say, and then they carried on moving along. And so, okay, so I followed it along. And then I left the procession, and then I turned the opposite way, went down Santa Monica, turned south, because I thought I'm going to go and see what's going on in Fairfax. Because the Grove, which is this area, which is a shopping area, very upmarket. Yeah, it's upmarket, but it's for everybody. It's not Beverly Hills. It's just nice. There's a Nike shop and nice coffee places, and some of that had just opened a few days ago, and restaurants, Cheesecake Factory and that sort of thing, and a lovely market there. So I whizzed down, and I'm on, which way did I go? I ended up on Melrose. I've come down Melrose, west of Fairfax, and I've cut across to hit Fairfax, and then I've come down Fairfax. So heading towards the CBS studios. And I lived last year before at Palazzo West, which was just opposite the Grove, this area. And you'll see in the reports where they've set cars on fire, and it really went off there. Or the police shot things. I mean, it's different perspectives and different reports. So I come down this road, and then as I'm coming down, I can see this throng of people coming towards me. And it's a lot denser, and it was a lot more sinister. There were a lot of people wearing black, more covered. I mean, majority wearing face masks. Is there social distancing? Not really. I saw someone walking towards me with a silver casing, and I wasn't sure whether it was a firework, and I was a bit nervous. It turned out it was the thing that the police had been shooting with the dye in it or something. And there's the smell of marijuana in the air, and they're coming towards me. And at that point, Michael Fitch calls me. And he's like, "What are you doing?" And I put him on video. And he's, "Mate, you should get out of there. That's not looking good." And I'm pretty gung-ho. And I said, no, I am getting it. I don't like it anymore. I think I'm done now. And it's about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And I said, this is going to go off. When nighttime comes, this is definitely going off. And I hadn't seen police on the Santa Monica route at all. I'd seen cars go past, but they didn't interfere. Anyway, so they're walking towards me, and I'm videoing it as well with my other camera. And I can see some guys graffitiing, literally. And I can see there's normal protesters, and there are people who are just out to raise hell. There's no question about it. There are groups of younger people who don't care. Like maybe whatever their reasoning, they are going to cause a problem. You can tell they're loaded to smash some stuff. And that is different from the protesters, because the 90% of the protesters were protesting. Like, everyone was moved to be out in it, and I was in it, and I felt part of it. You know, I could definitely, I felt like, you know, this is valid. This is a point to make. So they're coming towards me, and I go, right, I'm going to leave now. And they turn up, I don't know if they turned up Melrose. Yeah, they were kind of going, and then it was time to go home. And then I got home and I called Michael, and you saw the mayhem on the screens, and you saw what was going on. And it was pretty terrible. And a curfew was called for 8 p.m. till 5:30 a.m., which means you are locked up. You cannot go out. The National Guard was called. They apparently would take about 7 hours to arrive. So the National Guard wasn't out last night. The police, all the police were called out. All leave was cancelled. The fire engines were out. A building was set alight in the Grove. I'm not sure if it was just the kiosk, but the Nike store, the Nordstrom's, a lot of damage, a lot of places looted. And then I'm just trying to remember. It was crazy. And I went out to the back of the building where our pool is, and you looked up, and I counted 5 helicopters. My friend went up to the roof. He counted 7. Now, of course, some of those would have been news helicopters. So that was fairly intense. Now you hear the National Guard is coming. And also, so I whizzed out to go to the supermarket, to Ralph's, before the lockdown, and it was about 7:30. They were already closed, and lots of shops were already closed. And I was on my scooter, so I could whiz around. So I came home, and then I heard and saw the pictures of what was happening locally, and I recognized the places. And there was places in Melrose, which were little boutique-y shops, an anime shop, just nothing, that they smashed in. I saw a group of people hoist an ATM machine out, and the news report was on them, and they were videoing them, and they lifted the ATM into a van, an open back van, truck, but it had no license plate on it. And the reporter was saying, we've got them, we'll follow them. Oh, there's no license plate. Well, they've got. So they took this ATM, they smashed stores that, you know, people are barely hanging on. People with businesses or without businesses in the current, you know, who knows if they have a business, but this happened. They wantonly smashed these places. I do not believe these are the protesters. These are people who have come specifically with looting in mind. This has nothing to do with protesting. These are people who have come. Some people came with hammers to smash. You know, you don't go out on a protest with a hammer and a rucksack. Yeah, I saw places I recognized being smashed. And then this morning, I woke up to see. I'm going to bed generally about 4 a.m. here. So I'm up later, and I saw the Village Idiot, which is a pub, which is a fantastic pub here on Melrose. Do you know it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a fantastic pub.
Fantastic pub. They show the football. The food's great. It's reasonable. The drink is a lovely, one of my favorite places. Smashed in. On their Instagram, you can see it. The glass, the doors were smashed in. They'd gone inside. They smashed up all the plates, everything inside. Absolutely wrecked it. To what end? No, well, anger. So the other argument is anger, and is it justified?
Well, there's both, isn't there? As you say, and this is when anybody has a cause. There are some people. There's a group of people who will just say, "Okay, now we're going to go and loot, and we're going to run, and we're going to cause a lot of destruction." There is absolutely, and this is what I call about an undercurrent, which is sort of bubbling under, and you get some of these stories. We get a version of it over here. It's always interesting because you're living it. You're there with the community. You recognize the shops. You probably recognize some of the people, some of whom will be so incensed by what's happened, and understandably, that you've got to work on that sort of basis. Others are just taking the opportunity to have a pop, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's always the case. And that, it's a reflection of this terrible left and right that we have that's developed, that you and I agree on 90% of the things we say, and then I say something that you disagree on. And
yeah, but I'll be right if that happens.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's cancel culture.
Yeah.
Then it's like, well, you said something I disagree with, you're evil. I disagree with you, and therefore we can no longer communicate. We can no longer debate the idea. And my position has changed with everything, constantly. I'm not stuck in the mud about where I'm coming from. There are some things that I fundamentally believe, and there are some things I'm thinking, I thought that before, I don't think that now.
Yeah, and I think the important thing on that is that make sure that everything is evidence-based. Because what happens by saying that the point about the news is that most people, same with newspapers, most people buy newspapers which reflect their existing views. And so the more that you realize, this is my view, this is my blinkered view, here's a newspaper confirming that view, that then becomes a spiral of repetition. Mm-hmm. And I think what you have to do in this day and age is absolutely more than any time when we're inundated with all sorts of information, 99.9% of which is rubbish, you need to be able to question everything. Get your evidence from different sources, get it from the ground, find out what's really happening and the reasons for that.
Yeah, I mean, I try not to get caught up, and it's very hard in social media, to responding to things that you think are just crazy. And I did respond to one on someone's Facebook, which they put it was the COVID thing, and they put something on that was a blog, and it started with the subtleties of Trump. It talked about subtleties of Trump. I mean, it was just nonsense, and it was demonstrably nonsense, and it was conspiracy theory nonsense. And I called a person out on it. I used the word uneducated in it. That was the button.
Were you surprised?
No, but then he started telling me to fuck myself and do things.
Oh, you get used to that thing. Well, I'll show the card trick to somebody else then. See, that's what your improv comes in.
Yeah. So so I try not to get caught up either side of that. So then today I went out to Melrose to go and check what it looked like, and sort of from the groundlings along from their theatre, which wasn't damaged, and neither was the coffee shop, but the Village Idiot was, and everything's boarded up, and people were boarding up ready for tonight in case there was anything. There was, and then you see the National Guard on the street. So then you feel like you've entered a war zone. Mm-hmm. I've never experienced that. Army, internal army, I guess the National Guard is, does the National Guard fight abroad? No, they just stay here all the time. So these cars I've never seen, these like almost tank-like things.
No, you had that extraordinary picture. You put that out on social media. There's extraordinary images, and it looks like a war zone.
Mm-hmm. And part of me is relieved that they're there. Part of me is it's too late. They missed the reason to be there because the place has already been smashed in. And part of me feels like this is the rise of fascism, and this is where it begins. This is where the totalitarian state begins, because our freedoms are gone. Our freedoms went in the lockdown. This idea that we live in a free society is to some degree a myth, because at any point they can say, this is for your own good. We're free, but at this point, this is for your own good. And that's when any totalitarian state begins. And that is definitely a fear. As much as I was like, well, good, they're going to stop things happening. Who are they going to stop? Me, you, rioters, the press. When I saw the CNN reporter, this was in Minnesota, I think it was arrested live on TV without being charged, while reporting, while being compliant, totally compliant. And he was black. And the white workers with him were not. And he still was compliant. And that was shocking. And they've shot at reporters. They, there is a big problem here with the police who are, there is a racism here that is really inbuilt. But then there's a lack of education. There's a terrible education gap. There's a terrible poverty gap. And then you've locked people down for 3 months. Tempers are just, it's simmering is not the word.
No, it's that whole pressure cooker. And you're right, when people are locked down, things get out of perspective. And as soon as it's like light the blue touch paper and just expect it to explode.
Yeah. And you see these, you see people looting, and you see young people going into the show because I don't know if they're in their right minds would do that, but they're there and they go, oh, look, there's a Nike shop is open. I'm going to go and take some shoes.
But it's the psychology of it, because you're caught up. It's like any crowd. You're just there. Everybody's doing it together. You're taken along by the crowd. You don't really know what you're doing. The psychologist would explain on that sort of basis. It's that mentality of the crowd where you follow exactly what everybody else is doing.
Yeah, and that's definitely, that was definitely happening. It was very clear. And now it didn't sound as noisy tonight, but Santa Monica went off today. So today it was Santa Monica, and Santa Monica is by the beach. It's very expensive, but there's a big shopping promenade there, and they let them smash some of the places. There was police blocking some places, but they don't have enough to deal with it. And places were ravaged, and and I saw one report where the guy has a hammer, and it's Ray, REI, which is a camping store, and he's smashing the door, and a girl who's a protester is standing, stopping him with a sign, and another guy goes and stands there, and they move on, this group of people. So and I've seen, we talk about evidence. I don't know. I've seen black people who were videoing these white girls graffitiing Black Lives Matter, and they're saying, why are you doing that? This is not what we're here to do. We're here to protest, but you're doing that. You're not doing that for me. And they're like, oh, we don't care. And it's, and so, it's these groups. It's like the Antifa thing, which I don't know much about, and I looked it up, and it's a strange thing. It seems like a strange thing, an anti-fascist organization, apparently, but it's not really an organization, and it seems to be taken over, and Trump is calling it a terrorist organization, which he may be right. I mean, I don't know. I'm just learning about it. I don't know. But equally, he wasn't quick to call the KKK a terrorist organization, who've been burning buildings, causing explosions, and attacking black people for years. And so, this strange, I'm lost for words to explain it.
Well, no, but I think, and this is the thing about words and social media, and we have that sort of stuff. The great thing, and also the biggest problem of society at the moment, is that everybody is given a platform to air their views and air their prejudices. One of the things that's been reported in the press this week, you mentioned about Trump, was his big row with Twitter. Talk to us about that.
So Twitter flagged one of his crazy tweets, one of his, I don't know, as fake news. There's so many levels of irony in that. And he said it's about freedom of speech. So you could listen to his argument without being politicized and say, well, is it? Do we have the freedom to say anything, lie or truth? And if we don't, who are the people who say this is allowed and this isn't allowed? And it's fair to say, look at YouTube. YouTube can run the gamut and silence people, and they decide what's real and what's not real. So in the wash, they have silenced people who are telling the truth. as well as the people who are telling lies. But meanwhile, we had an election based on lies on both countries, in the UK and the US. We had lies that were demonstrably lies that were perpetuated by Facebook. Facebook had allowed total lies and hatred to be put on their platform. They allowed it. They allowed it. The so-called Russian bots and all of this, they allowed stuff to be there that was demonstrably lies. And Sacha Baron Cohen gave an interesting talk about that. About, you know, if Hitler had been allowed, was around, he would be saying stuff on Facebook and no one would stop him. So, yeah, it's an interesting one. It's a hard one for me to kind of quantify because I personally think Trump is so crazy and there's such a lack of leadership in this country. And it's been such a kind of a journey you could see happening. You know, you could kind of see the result, this kind of constant allowing. It was like the Charlottesville uprising, that he's never calls these things out. He doesn't act like a leader. Forget your political perspective. He never says this is wrong, you know, or you never believe anything he says. And this is the man who says drink bleach and take hydrochloroquine. And you know, the defenders of him say, oh, he's just being flippant, he's being ironic. He's not ironic. They don't have irony, and he certainly doesn't. And so it's a disaster. And then you see, and this is my perspective of things, this is how I see it, but then you see Biden as the potential candidate who just looks lost half the time. So you've got this candidate who you have to vote for if you don't believe in Trump's stuff. If you believe that abortion should be a right, then you can't vote for Trump. I mean, there's a point. That's a very clear one. But then you've got Biden, who doesn't instill any sense of hope and faith. So you hope that the people he brings into his team are inspiring, because this is not a leader who's going to persuade a lot of people who would vote for Trump not to. I think some people have been swayed, and I don't think the pandemic has helped Trump. And I don't think the race riots don't help anybody.
And it is interesting. I mean, I won significant amounts of money on principle of the head of a major news network predicting that Trump would get in the first time round. Because I think what people do, they underestimate it. It's very easy when you have an extreme. What people underestimate is the thoughts, the mindset of people in America to say, actually, I quite like some of the things that he's saying. And this is what some people, when they vote for people, this is what they say. The other thing, and this is why the pollsters always get it wrong and have done historically about Brexit, they got it wrong about the Conservative government, they got it wrong about Trump. And again, I predicted all of this, is what happens is if you ask somebody a view which is perceived not to be a popular view, you won't tell the truth. So the pollster says, oh, are you going to elect Trump? No, of course not. That's not what I'm going to do. So it skews what's happening in reality. So people dismiss these views and the power of it at their peril. So what's going to happen? Trump, absolutely, with the economy, if the economy was going there, he would have got a second term. What's happening now, it's a really strange situation, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. I think had there been no pandemic, I think with a buoyant economy, although a huge deficit, and with an electorate who have a very short memory, he could have won again.
He would have done. Would have done. I had money on that. I hadn't lost a single bet with his head of the network, and it's right. All proven. It was good. No, he would have done, without a doubt, because second term, that's what happens. There are always the people who are going to say negative things about it, and it's crazy, because unless you can have a rational discussion, you're not going to convert anybody. It's the point I was making about the media. People are there, they're going to read this, they're going to regurgitate that. That just confirms their beliefs. You don't do anything. The clever thing, and what showed about the elections and the power of data, which is all of a sudden came out, because what happens, you embrace that. The thing about Brexit and the fantastic, the revelation about what's happening, about how data is being used. It's the people who haven't voted beforehand, the people who are the ones who might change their opinion. Those are the ones that people focus on. You've already got your people who are going to vote for you. You've got the people who are never going to vote for you. The ones you need to work on the middle ground. And some of those have never voted. So what's happening now is the big economy, the big currency is all about data. And when people on social media are giving all this information about favorite albums, and this is what I've done, this is what I haven't done, and that's all data. And that's the really, really dangerous thing, isn't it?
Yeah. And there's this, what you touched on earlier is the listening to your own bias, and only listening to your own bias. And they do that here a lot in California. They definitely do. And that's why I quite enjoy the Joe Rogan podcast, because he gets a variety of opinions on, and he debates, and his position can be flexible, and he can also be absolutely adamant. And it's quite interesting. They've called him out as a right winger, and he's so not, but he's called out left and right. And it's like Bill Maher. Again, you know, the only two, the people I listen to quite a lot here are Bill Maher and Joe Rogan. Not to say I agree with everything, but it's an interesting argument, and they'll argue and debate with people. And that's so refreshing, because so many won't. And then I listen to Jimmy Kimmel's monologue, because he's very smart and it's very funny. And just some of the ludicrous things that go on. But
you have to do that though, Paul, don't you? Because this is the whole thing. As you know, I'm a lawyer. This is what you do. You're a paid mouthpiece to represent and get whatever case it happens to be, and present it in the best possible way. If you don't listen to every possible side, you won't be able to make an informed decision. And that's why it's so key. Let's get brilliant people who will explain what the position is. Let's interrogate them on both sides. Let's keep an open mind. Because otherwise, all you're going to do is regurgitate your own prejudices.
And you can't call the play after the play.
No.
And that's what a lot of people do. You know, it's all well and good to say Boris has screwed this up, and this is wrong, and this is wrong, and that's wrong, which it may be. But nobody knew. Now, the other argument is preparation, and they knew about being prepared. And on that level, they are totally amiss. I mean, there's for sure that is definitely wrong. There was no preparation, and they knew about pandemics. We've had many, many pandemics.
Absolutely. 1918, we had the Spanish flu, and the whole pattern, and there were more deaths in the second wave. And what happened is, in 1918, they didn't find, obviously, a vaccine. It just died a death, literally. But the interesting thing is that this has changed the focus, if you like, from what used to be the celebrities and the politicians. You've now got everyday heroes who are coming out and making sense. The most impressive people are those who've come out, for example, Professor Sarah Gilbert, who would come out, and she's a virologist who understands it, and looking for a vaccine. She had fact, admitted when she didn't know something or she wasn't sure, and moved on. The politicians are given little sound bites. They're not given all the information, so they'll go on with Piers Morgan, who will do his Piers Morgan thing, great television, but the reality is they look silly. We don't really get any more information other than the fact they look silly, and we're left with a vacuum. We don't know the facts, and that then spreads fear, and fear, as we say, is terrible. We've got new rules now that we can mix with. You've got groups of 6 are okay, but people are so scared that what's going to happen to them that they're locking themselves down and say, look, we prefer just to stay at home.
And people are doing the opposite.
Oh, yeah.
And they're not telling you they're doing the opposite because they don't want to be called out on it. And you can't blame them for doing the opposite. You can't blame people, because ultimately we have to live. And I do not believe, I think the lockdown's finished. I think that's gone. Your opportunity, they've had that. To do it again, it won't happen, because people just go, no, forget that. I'm just going to go about my life. Unless there was a visual bubonic plague that you could see jumping from people, that ain't going to happen. I don't believe.
They do. That's exactly what they do. Some of the best adverts are exactly that, where people spray that sort of green stuff out, and so this shows you why it should be 2 meters on that sort of basis. And so you have all of that. It's rather like those, I don't remember the adverts in the 80s. You may not have done, when AIDS was here, and then they had that big iceberg.
Absolutely, remember that.
In a very serious voice. This is the scare tactic. This is the stuff we don't know about. But that then brings fear. It brings prejudice. It brings what happens. All the people who were constitutional experts a few weeks ago, when we talked about Brexit over here, all of a sudden are virologists. They've all got their theories which they peddle and they regurgitate. Crazy stories like 5G masks and stuff like that is spreading, all that sort of rubbish. And even you mentioned about the Trump thing, even that was twisted, because if people listen to the press conference, he actually didn't say drink bleach. He didn't say that at all. He said, perhaps we should look at it. Now, I get it. And if you're disagreeing with Trump, you're going to say, he said drink bleach. Well, he didn't. What he said is, should we look at it? To which the scientists probably said, well, maybe not. But those are the actual words. So I think what people need to do is keep an open mind, listen to the experts, and work out that the experts themselves don't agree, because somewhere between all of that is the truth.
I hope so. I mean, the AIDS thing, do you remember they said you would get it from toilet seats?
Yeah, crazy.
And they're saying that the virus is on cereal packets, and they're saying the virus is on money, currency. Now, of course, governments have wanted to get rid of currency for a long time. It suits their agenda, because we don't like currency because we can hide it. So that's not a conspiracy theory. That's
I get it. You can find evidence in the current climate. As I say, as a lawyer, that's what you do. You turn around and say, look, how can I find the evidence? The internet itself will supply you with enough evidence to support any view, however extreme. That's what happens. So you're right. You can turn around and say, there's a conspiracy theory here. I wanted to introduce new platforms. I wanted to introduce track and trace for people, identity cards. All this stuff is for your own good. That's how the conspiracy theorists can say, we're selling it on that sort of premise. What you then do is turn around and say, well, actually, is that right? Because there are other ways of doing things. The whole thing about identity cards, a big issue we had over here for ages. The reality is you're filmed every second of the day, every credit card you use, every phone call you make. We have all that information if you want to do it. And yet people voluntarily give more and more information. You play with social media, you do any of those quizzes, the new currency is data. That's the one thing you should preserve. That's your identity, and that's what you have the right to determine how people can use and when.
Yeah. Are people going to use the track and trace? Does it matter?
Well, it only works if everybody uses it. And it's rather like, it's like you mentioned the plague. It's like the old days when you used to have a bell. Is it unclean? I mean, you're working on that sort of premise. I mean, how's that going to work? But it will only work. It will only work if everybody's honest and uses it.
But people aren't, and they won't. That I can guarantee. It's a bit like if you've got a sniffle. People will have a sniffle and they go, "Oh, I can't show anyone I've got a sniffle, or I've got a headache, or I'm feeling a bit. I can't, but I'm not going to say anything."
No, absolutely, and I think that's the problem. So tell me, from a humour point of view, because we always say, and comedians will always say, that the secret of comedy is to find out where the line is and go beyond it. I think it was a George Carlin quote, which is absolutely right. How are the comics responding to the current situation?
I can only ascertain from what I watched. I'm not in their community, and I'm not a comic per se. Although, I sort of say I'm a comedian now because I do that sort of thing. Actually, the most impressive thing I saw was pre this was Ricky Gervais at the Golden Globes. I thought it was the most masterful comedic monologue I've ever seen. That hit every button on the nose. I mean, it was absolutely fantastic. Excuse me. And he's brought up quite a lot of things that we're talking about, that they're making documentaries about the Epstein, so many things, abuse, etc., etc. I think the comics I think it will be exactly the same. I think it's exactly the same. I think it's the people who go, you can't say that, and the people who do. And they look to, over here, Dave Chappelle is the number one guy, which is interesting because in the UK, I don't think he is as big, or he's certainly become bigger now, but a lot of the general public don't even know who he is. Here he's massive, and he gets away with saying the unsayable. He gets away with the stuff that we would turn around and say, you know, that's disgusting, you can't say that, that's racist, that's prejudice, and he can say it. It was quite interesting. So I'm quite pleased for him, although not all his stuff makes me laugh particularly. When I'm looking for comedy, you've got the late night hosts. So you've got Fallon, Kimmel, the two Jimmys. You've got Trevor Noah. You've got James Corden. To me, Kimmel is funny. Kimmel is very sharp. Trevor Noah gets to the point quite often. Sometimes his little comedy asides are a bit weird, especially in the lockdown thing. Kimmel's very, very sharp. Kimmel can do it without an audience. That's what's quite interesting about Kimmel, because we talked about this need to respond. Kimmel can do it without an audience. Fallon seems to me not as funny, but very fun. He's a good kind of character, and he's nice, and he's a pleasant fellow. And then you have the Bill Maher's, and Bill Maher's now doing his lockdown show, and he uses a laugh track on his monologue, and it's horrible.
That's not going to work, is it?
It's really weird because people are laughing at not what he's saying. So it's really, really weird.
Unless he does it ironically, or there's a sort of funny little moment, or a boom tish, or whatever it is.
Yeah, it's a bit weird on the Bill Maher, and I'm a big fan of his show.
It's a great show.
And he said, you know, he really delves deep. And then Joe Rogan, who's a comedian, but he's really... there was a fellow he had on recently who's, I think, one of these YouTube guys I think he's from Boston, youngish guy. It was a very interesting conversation, and it was very balanced, and they argued. The other guy put his point across, you know, because Joe Rogan brought out the thing about Biden being senile and losing his words, and this other guy argued the point that he isn't, but he is 80, and gave examples, and it was very measured and very interesting. So that's what I listen to generally. And then, you know, I dip into the UK as well. So I'm kind of straddling both experiences, but I don't know a lot of really, well, there's a couple of people who are the sort of very right wing, and the Trump supporters and the Republicans. And there's a guy on my Facebook who I keep there because I want to hear it, but it's very hard. It's very hard because the arguments are insane. They're not even arguments half the time.
Yeah, and see, I like a good argument. If people are rational about it and can state an opinion, supply evidence, at least we can debate it. So I would always encourage anybody to question everything. This is what I said beforehand. I don't want to just regurgitate the same old tired views. And the other thing, Paul, as well, is just to what extent is what's happening in Europe and in the UK in particular, how's that being reported in the States?
Pretty much it's not. They are very US-centric. I don't hear any news about the UK in the American media particularly. Yeah, you know, my joke about London, it's in England, it's in Europe, it's funny because it's true.
Yeah, and it's going to be quite old. It's not going to be true after Brexit, although it's still technically in Europe and not part of that time.
Yeah, exactly. But we're still in Europe. And then I can make a Brexit joke, or, oh, remember the old days, or, you know, whatever. Oh, isn't it great now? Or,
the Great British Break-Off was always my favourite Brexit joke, but that would only really work.
The problem is I would put some unpalatable jokes in there about death and destruction.
But are they unpalatable? I mean, this is my point, because now with comedy, it's rather like punk. When people would say one swear word, it would shock people. Now, every monologue is punctuated every other word with a swear word. You become immune to it, don't you? So are there areas, and this is what I was getting at about the comics, are there areas which are taboo?
Well, it was interesting because pre all this, the conversation was about gender roles and the pronoun, and can you call people out, and the trans question, and are you a woman then? And there's a lot of the Emperor's New Clothes, and again, Gervais touched on it. He did the whole Bruce.
I know, but the driving gags and everything, absolutely.
Yeah, and it was brilliant, and it was a well-crafted joke because it questioned, and it wasn't saying anything negative about trans people or male, female. It was questioning what you can say and how you can say it, and judgment, and that was a big issue, and obviously that's been pushed to the side. But I saw, is there anything you can't say? I don't think there is any. I don't think that ever changes. I think you always have to find the subject matter and the relevance. And it was a bit like Paul Daniels. It comes back to that. Paul Daniels became irrelevant. He did get pushed off the air because he was the old working men's working club comedian, magician. And, there was that wonderful, I think you were there when they had the tribute to Paul Daniels at the Magic Circle. And they had a video, and they put a video up, and it was, what's that ITV show that was horribly racist with Bernard Manning? And
the Comedians, is that one? So
no, it had 3 words, Tinkers.
Mind your language.
No, it was a cabaret show,
right?
Like from a working man's club,
yeah.
And they had Paul Daniels on it. It was in the thing.
The heel tappers, something like that. Yes,
that's the one. Yeah. And it had the most racist, homophobic, sexist, and anti-Semitic lines in it you would never say, and it was shocking. And that was the tribute. That's the one they pulled out. Although the magic was fantastic. So things change and tastes change, obviously, and you have to move with that.
But humor's always, if you go all the way back, and this is very interesting, but you go all the way back to the Greeks and other bits of business, jokes are always the same pattern. It's always about your neighbours are stupid or whatever, especially when you're in an island mentality, or you pick on the minorities, or you pick on people who are different. And if you look at all the gags, in the same way as about magic, you've got 8 principles. Once you've learned that, is then how you do your narrative, as you say. With a joke, it's the same sort of thing. It's either about exaggeration, or it's about prejudice, or it's about questioning all the things we take for granted. And those sort of elements will always apply, won't they?
Yes. I mean, it's like taking the piss out of Americans. You could say that's xenophobic. Oh, that's nice. Oh, you take the piss out of Americans. How dare you? I do it all the time. Now, it's not just to take the piss out of Americans. It's to point out things, and it's not really making them the butt of the joke necessarily. It's to say certain ways of thinking. It's more pointing out certain ways of thinking and questioning those. And that's the joke. And we laugh at recognition. It comes back to that groundlings thing, that it's not about you and I making a birdcage on stage. What we laugh at is the relationship. We recognize if we're playing brothers, but the task is making a bird cage, a bird house. Yes, it's very nice that we can create the birdhouse and it all looks real. But what we really laugh at is, wow, they know each other. Oh, I know exactly what that is. That's just like me and my brother. Yes, he's an arse. I know that thing. That's hysterical. And that's what we laugh at in that way. And that's what that comedy is a different comedy to the stand-up telling the story and showing the craziness of the world. And I think the stand-ups, they show what annoys them. Oh, you know what annoys me? And look at that guy. You know how crazy that is? Look at our president. What a nutter, because blah, 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 blah. And we'll either go, no, don't agree. Or we'll go, yeah, I agree. I know exactly what you mean. And in fact, I think Rogan talked about it, finding that line where the people who support both sides laugh. And that's a hard thing to do because it's really easy to go on. Everyone hates Trump and do Trump jokes.
Yeah, I know, but it gets boring after a while. And so people do the same sort of thing. I was, as you probably know, I was chair of the Montreux Comedy Festival, the international one, for a couple of years. And we basically encouraged comics from all over the world to come in. And we've had some fantastic ones from South Africa. I think we've had Trevor Noah and various other people. And I had a guy from Cairo who I was interviewing on the show yesterday. And there is a common theme, and the common theme is that human nature, the way that we behave, is hilarious. And it's very predictable, and there are patterns whichever culture you come from. And if you can shine a light on those, it's a coping mechanism, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, when I go back to that cancer joke in the dice thing, now you could say, well, that's horrible. People die of cancer. That's horrible. People die of car crashes. People die of all sorts of things. And my dad died of cancer. So I kind of feel like I own it. And there were loads of things that were funny about that. Horrible, but funny. And we laugh at the horrible. It's a coping mechanism. And it makes it a lot better because, you know, if we all just sat here in terror, you talked about the fear and the panic. All panic is tension. So panic is useless to us. Panic is no good. Panic makes us freeze. And tension makes us freeze. We cannot think under tension. We cannot move under tension. These are a waste of our time. They don't help us. And so when we're like, you know, when someone's crying and it's a horrible, and then you make a joke and they start laughing, and then they're crying and laughing, and then suddenly the shoulders release, and suddenly that tension drops. It's even having this conversation. You know, we're locked up. I haven't seen you for, when was I last in the UK? In the summer, maybe?
Yeah, long time. Several months ago.
So the relief of seeing you is palpable. You know, it's joyous. We have a shared commonality. We're friends. We've experienced things, ups and downs and all sorts of things. And this is wonderful that we have this technology that allows us to, and so suddenly we've relaxed into conversation, and we're telling stories, and we're having a back and forth, and it's a relief, and we're not judging. And we could say something that again, taken out of context, oh, that's not right, but it's in context.
No, and I think that's the other important thing, is that now the technology is there. We can make people say anything. Your Trump situation is a classic example, because the press did report that incorrectly. And they all said, Trump said, inject yourself with it. He didn't. That's not what he said. But the reality is that even if you don't say it, we can now make you talk about deep fake and that sort of stuff. With videos, we can manipulate those. You can have a look at how you cut certain scenes. We've known this for years. The whole idea of question everything. And it's when people snipe about other people, it's human nature to try and gossip about people behind their back, or to say this about them. And people are falling out all of the time. And the reason they fall out is because you've never spoken. Communication is one of the most important things. And I always say that the more tools we have for communicating, the more mobile phones, the more technology, the worse we are at actually communicating. Because if you go and see people in restaurants when you can, they're all buried in their phones. They don't know how to speak. They don't know how to engage in the way that we're talking now. And what happens is prejudices and fears and insecurities all come out. So we start saying, oh, there's something horrible about Paul Roffman, or something horrible about Andrew Eborn. What happens is, that makes, oh, yes, I heard something horrible about him as well. And I heard something horrible. And then all of a sudden you become this monster, as opposed to turning around and saying, actually, what I do is I say, well, why don't we say that to him or her directly and ask them? Because so often perception and reality are not aligned. And I always say, in relationships and various other things around the world, talk. Because the more you can talk, it's the old saying, jaw, jaw, not war, war. That's what they used to say on that sort of stuff. Sit down and talk about things, because then we can make sure perceptions are corrected. We can make sure that somebody gets an opportunity to justify the perception of them, or to correct it. Because without that, I think the world's a messy, messy place. And we have enough problems, don't we?
Well, we have... there is this thing, and I do it. I'm guilty of it. I create a narrative or a monologue, or I create somebody else's thought pattern. they're probably thinking this when I did this. I said this, and I know what they're going to think. They're thinking this, and they hate me now. Or I haven't heard from that person. They probably hate me. Yep. They probably think I'm the worst actor. I'm the worst magician. I'm the worst person. And then suddenly you get a call from somebody and they go, "Oh, Paul, I think you're brilliant at this. Could you come and do this?" And you go, "Yeah, but inside you thought, I thought they hated me." Or, my mum's going to be annoyed at me because I did this. And then I speak to my mum and she's like, "Oh, that was funny."
No, absolutely. And I think I was talking to Harvey Goldsmith on who's fantastic, because where you stand with Harvey. He's no questions at all. He will tell you, and he will say people make mistakes, but it's much easier. We're talking about Dominic Cummings and what should happen in that situation. I don't know that story that you probably wrote on social media over here, but going all the way up to Durham, and they might have had a reason for it. But whatever happens, what Harvey was saying, look, just come clean. If you messed up, you messed up. It's much easier to say, this is what happened, because otherwise it becomes, oh, what a tangled web we weave. You try to put this spin on that spin and everything else. And I think in this day and age where you get all the spin, getting the opportunity to turn around and say, look, people mess up all the time, but at least have the opportunity to say, I've messed up. This is, however, are the reasons, and I'm sorry about perception and reality. Let me tell you what's happened. And then you can preempt it. Because what happens is people always say history repeats itself, and yet they very, very rarely learn the lessons of history.
It's absolutely that. That's why here, Newsom has been good to listen to, and Cuomo's been good to listen to in New York, because I've heard both of them question their own advice and own up to it and own it. And Cuomo certainly did. He turned around and said, I think we got this wrong, and we got that wrong, and this wasn't right, but I'm learning this. And I think Macron did that as well in France, and they went, oh, even the people who hated him went, well, okay, fair enough. And Boris has failed on that because he just doesn't seem to own it. And it seems that he's lost a lot of good faith being ill and going through that. And now in a sense, it's a non-issue and it's an issue at the same time. It's both. It's like, it's the Cummings thing was like, I don't want to read about it. I don't care anymore. But of course I understand the people who said, I didn't go to my mum's funeral. I've been locked down. I've listened to the advice that you are the one who came up with. So surely these people are intelligent enough to go, yeah, if I do go off, that could be perceived.
Oh, no, absolutely. And this is my point. Dominic is an incredibly clever guy. He knows, because he was, and it's a brilliant Cumberbatch did it, and basically there was a recreation about what happened with Brexit. It's what I was touching on earlier about the data and the middle ground with people who are not deciding. You're not going to get those who say, definitely, we're in, we're out, we're the hokey cokey. Doesn't matter, you're never going to change them. It's the middle ground you go for. And he was the one who helped, let's work on sound bites, let's look at what's going to appeal to them, let's do a bit of market research, because these are the key messages. And he was the one who understands it. So my point about Dominic Cummings is he would have known that if he's going to go all the way up there, somebody's going to have a pop. So you preempt that. This is my point about history repeating itself. You have the minister in Scotland, senior advisor, senior one of the politicians there did the same sort of thing just up the road a bit, had to resign. So Dominic should have said, well, hang on, I'm going to do this. How do I justify it? Do I preempt? This is what I've got to try and do and tell people. And that's my point, because in spite of people saying that history repeats itself, they don't learn those lessons.
And Kinnock, the young Kinnock, Stephen Kinnock, is it? He did it. And, there's been a load of cases, and there's footballers and what have you. It's crazy. It's crazy. The interesting thing, you talk about history and repeating itself and learning from history. And it is the great quote, I don't know if it was Sophocles or Aristotle or someone, or it's misquoted, but it's, if we don't learn from history, we're doomed to repeat it.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And the 1918 pandemic is a great one to look at. And if you want to understand how things aren't really as terrible as we're made to believe, then look at that, understand that. As soon as you start understanding it, you go, okay, this is probably what's going to happen. Did you know in I think it was around 1924, there was another plague in East LA. There was another.
No, what I've done is not only that, I've had lots of historians on the thing, because I've said exactly that. History repeats itself. So let's look at what happened last time we had a plague, because you get this, like coronavirus. People said, oh, hang on, it says it on a bottle. They must have known about this. Well, it's true. There have been lots of coronaviruses throughout history. COVID-19 is only the year that we had this particular one. That's what you've got, you know. So you're right. Let's look at what happened in LA, but and work on that sort of basis. So what do they do in that situation? Remind us.
So I read about it on LA Curbed, which is a online magazine here, and apparently there was a comedian of Mexican heritage. It was a very poor area, East LA, and it was ramshackle and run down. And there was a dying rat, which he picked up and threw into a trash can or a rubbish bin, and he caught a plague from this rat. And he went back to his house and he passed it on to his whole family, and they all died of this plague. I think it was bubonic plague. It may have been, and it went right through the community. And they started burning down these houses. And of course, there was no protections, and certain people lost all their livelihoods and businesses. But it was quarantined. The area was severely quarantined, and it died out.
Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely. And they all the plagues. They say there was no basically immunity ever found for the other ones. They just naturally died out. And that's part of the worry that people have, is that if it dies out, we'll never find, because we won't have enough people to test the new vaccine. But it shows you the power of fake news. If you're getting all the way back to the bubonic plague, when that first started, it spread that it was basically what's causing it are the cats. The cats are causing this. So people would slaughter all of the cats. And the reality was that it was the rats that were causing it. And because the cats were all gone, the rats spread even more, and it spread even faster.
I didn't know.
Talk about the early days of fake news and the damage that can do. It worked on that principle.
Yeah. And we see it with that. And there's so many examples of plagues. So that's nothing new. Ebola. I mean, they've only just started to contain that in a certain area. And, it's horror. It's worse than this. If you catch that, that's not very good. Measles, terrible. You don't want to catch measles.
I don't think you want to catch anything. It's all that sort of principle. And you're right. Some of these things they don't have a cure, and they never will have. Some of the things you mentioned, you've just got to catch them, and you get immunity, and hopefully that works. And that's why people used to have measles parties. I don't know if you remember those.
Oh yeah.
Used to send people around. They've got measles. Hurrah! All around to their house, because that's what you've got to do. But we still need the facts and the figures and other bits and pieces and start listening to the right sort of people. Paul, it's been an absolute delight. We'll get you back, because I like having somebody on the ground in LA. I'm talking to the head of Comcast in a few days' time as well. I've got a few journalists around there, but we'll get you back. We'll get you to show us some magic next time as well. But some fantastic lessons
do
there.
Some work.
We'll do some work. No, we love it. No, improv. I love the idea. You're a magician. You've got to perform. Monkey. But in the meantime, Paul Roffman, it's been a delight. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Andrew. It's been a pleasure.
Take care. Bye-bye.
See you soon. Bye.
So all the way to LA with one of our many people on the ground. We are looking at people around the world. I think the great thing about this show is that we can get first-hand accounts of what's going on, and lessons should and could be learned. If you've got any comments, any thoughts, if you'd like to be on the show, write to me at lol, that's LOL, @octopustv.com. Be safe, be careful, question everything, and join me next time. I've been Andrew Eborn. You've been great. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.